Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for setting up this conversation. I was educated in the humanities and raised in a very strong faith tradition. And actually, 40 years ago this month, I was a freelance filmmaker. I was making films. I studied at the London Film School in the early 70s, came back to the States, and was making public affairs documentaries. In 1974, the economy got tight, and so somebody told me there was a computer company in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that was looking for an industrial film. I thought, I didn't study at a European art school to do industrial films, but there was a tough economy, and you know, hunger is a great motivator. So I went and I talked to them, the company, and it was clear after about 2 minutes in the conversation I didn't know anything at all about these things called semiconductors, and they said that's okay. We don't know anything about how to make movies, so we'll make this work. And the company was Univac, and they were fantastic. They wanted a good product, so they said, we're going to open up our company, whatever you want to find out about. And this was back in the days of mainframes, so that computing was these big room-sized machines. And they were great. I mean, they just gave me carte blanche. They were doing all kinds of things that are still leading edge. Voice recognition, speech synthesis, computer music, computer art, things that now can fit in a tablet, but then were really pretty far out. But at our first meeting, I was asked the scope of the project. They said, we want to make a film that will convey to our OEMs the need for Six Sigma in the making of their SRAMs and DRAMs. And I thought, dear God, if I stepped through the looking glass, I mean, I didn't understand a word they said in 1974. And it was just a totally different world. And I thought this was the ravings of a madman, but I looked out in the parking lot, there's hundreds of cars, there's a lot of people working in this building, and in the building next door, something's going on that I don't know anything about, and I better start figuring out what it is. So after Univac gave me a good introduction to computers, they said, well, now you should learn something about the components, the semiconductors. So they sent me to a startup company in Santa Clara called Intel for another 2 weeks. So by the end of the summer of 1974, I had probably as good an education as any layman could have on the coming digital revolution. And so after a couple of years doing writing for computer companies in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, I decided to move out to what was just becoming to be called Silicon Valley, where I've lived and worked ever since. I supported myself and my family doing public relations for companies of every size, from 2 guys in a garage to companies whose names you'd recognize. But with a background as a writer, I wrote what I believe is the first published novel set in Silicon Valley. And then in the early 80s, I wrote a nonfiction book called Charged Bodies, People, Power, and Paradox in Silicon Valley, that the Computer Press Association reckoned as acknowledged as a book of the year. So on one hand, I've supported myself inside companies or as a consultant in, over the years, probably 100 companies of all sizes. But I've also had this interest in, because I don't see electronics at the bit level, I tried to place, where does this revolution fit into a larger, where does it fit into world history? Where does it fit into religion? Where does it fit into all kinds of issues? And so that's been a preoccupation. And starting about 25 years ago or 20 years ago, I began speaking and writing on the need to reconnect technical capability with moral and social responsibility, because it became apparent to me from early on that words like virtue and values do not appear in any technical writing. And so I started asking why. Shouldn't they? You know, we talk about progress, but there isn't a lot of discussion of what we want to progress towards. We talk about, you know, making things better, faster, cheaper, smoother, cooler, but where are we trying to get to in such a hurry? We all enjoy GPS technology, but we seem to have lost any sense of a moral compass, in the West anyway. I mean, you look at the entertainment that we put out, much of it is just embarrassing to watch. So how do you reconnect this technology drive that seems to be feeding upon itself with the ethical values and the moral values and just the humane values that inform the tradition going back to people sitting around a campfire? The ancient notion of tools was that they are implements for us to use. But I think the role has switched, and now we're the tools of our tools. And I'm not sure how much longer we can do that. The digital revolution serves one key purpose. It's hidden, it's secret, but it's a dirty little secret, and that is it's to get rid of human employment. The purpose of digital technology is to do away with jobs. We've seen it in a whole bunch of jobs up to now. But I would say that if someone was doing a residency in brain surgery today, they should probably start thinking about what they're going to do in 20 years. Because by then, brain surgery will be done by nanobots under the control of a technician in Lagos, Nigeria. We're creating a world that is inhumane, and we just can't see it. We're so caught up in the buzz that we're missing what the goal of this revolution is. So we got this odd situation where we're doing away with jobs, but everywhere you go, you have your mobile device that bombards you with ads to buy stuff that is increasingly trivial. And to hold our attention till the ads come on, we're inundated with entertainment that is salacious, violent, and dehumanizing. We've created a perfect storm, really. And when I hear people talking about, let's take it to the next step, I want to be careful. That next step may be a severe drop. I think the time has come to rethink science and technology. The world up until 400 years ago was thought to be magical, and people invented gods and genies and leprechauns and all kinds of things to account for natural phenomena. Jove, when it thundered and lightning, it's because Jove was having an argument with his wife up on Mount Olympus. And then starting about 400 years ago, we began to get a little more precise. The scientists finally got out from under the control of the churchmen, and they said that they worked out a modus operandi after the Galileo case. The churchmen will deal with things spiritual, and we scientists will deal with the material world. And that seemed to be a modus operandi that everybody could work with. But it's been catastrophic. The universe was divided, and now we're muddling our way through a biverse of natural, supernatural, physical, metaphysical, pious, profane, sacred, secular, and it doesn't work. I mean, we're falling apart at the seams. So we've come to a point in our science and technology that we really have to stop and think, what are we doing? So we had a magical world up until 400 years ago. Now we live in a material world, a clockwork universe. What we have to do is somehow find a way to progress easily into a mature, a meaningful sense of the universe. Science is really good at measuring, but scientists cannot talk about meaning. Technologists can leverage natural forces, but they're never allowed to ask to what end. They're still protected by the doctrine of ethical neutrality. As long as it works to spec, it's okay. Well, wait a minute, let's think this through. I was on a panel once at MIT with a scientist who said something common in that field, that the more the universe is comprehensible, the more meaningless it becomes. And I said, I notice you have a wedding ring. You're married? Yeah. You love your wife? Yes. And yet you find the universe meaningless. How can that be? And he said, well, yeah, I've been vaguely aware of that issue, but I try not to think about it. I wanted to hit him upside the head and said, why don't you start thinking about it, huh? We're really good at controlling things, but we're not asking what we're trying to control them towards, what direction we want to get. We've become so digitized, in fact, that as you can see, I had a tooth removed last week, and I'll get a replacement on my return to the States. But somebody asked me if I was saving the space for a Google tooth, which, why not? You got Google glasses. Why not have Google teeth that have an IP address and are connected to the cloud, and that way the NSA will know what I'm chewing for breakfast before I even swallow the contents, and that will probably make things a little more easy for them. I'm an outsider. I'm an outsider. I don't live in this continent. And to be here on the 100th anniversary of the start of the Great War, so much has gone on in this city. 2 great wars, a Cold War, the Wall. As a stranger, as an outsider, I'm really keenly aware of all the history I'm seeing that's all around me. And at the same time, in the past 100 years, science had totally revolutionized our understanding of nature. Traditionally, we saw nature as shaped in a wedge, and God was a wedge. God made chosen people, and everybody else could just buzz off. We've always been taught to think wedge shape. There's us and them, the other. And God knows this city has been at the center of that, as have so many other places in civilization. The natural sciences are screaming out to us, even though they won't find meaning in it, that everything is in balance. We find out now that electrons are both energy and matter in ways that we still don't know how to comprehend. Time and space, in fact, form one fabric of space-time, which is both straight and curved. Chaos is not chaos at all. It's very highly evolved order. What we need to do is to take these discoveries of the natural world that the sciences have presented to us in the past century and rethink our social conventions, our political conventions, and our economic conventions. You can't separate one from the other. We have to move beyond the wedge to understand that we're living in a web universe. In fact, some science even indicates that we live in a holographic universe, that each part contains the entire universe. How can that be? Well, we can't comprehend that by thinking the way we've always thought. But there have been experiments that indicate that some of them have the name spooky action at a distance. I mean, everything we thought we knew about how the world is put together is changing before us. And we have to change our ways of thinking. We have to come back to beyond a magical and a materialistic understanding of the world to a more meaningful one, which is that everything is interconnected. And if you do damage over here, it's going to come out over there. And we not only have to rethink our science, our notions of science and technology, but all the human aspects, civic society that fall out of that, politically, economically, culturally, and in every other way. The point of technology, all technology, I think, there may be some exceptions, is based on the principle of leverage. That is to say, you minimize the inputs to get greater and greater outputs. Archimedes famously said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum strong enough and I could lift the world. And indeed you could if there was some place in space to rest the fulcrum on. From the earliest days, our ancestors specialized in leveraging muscles. Obviously they had some work to do, clear fields, drain swamps, build temples to appease the gods, and all the other things. And so out of that came the 6 classical tools of antiquity: the lever, the screw, the wheel, fulcrum. And then, again, starting about 400 years ago with the scientific revolution, we began to make tools to leverage our senses. The telescope, the microscope, later on the radio. And now we're at the point where we are really, really good at scoping things out at the surface with telescopes, microscopes, stethoscopes, oscilloscopes. But as I was saying earlier, in the sciences, science as science cannot ask about what does all this mean, and that's got to change. So we had tools of antiquity that leverage our muscles. In the scientific and industrial revolution, we've had tools that leverage our senses. Starting about 50 years ago, tools that leverage our brains. I think we need to recognize that it's time to have tools that leverage our spirit or our mind or whatever that part of us is that we can never define, but that seems to be universally recognized. And as it turns out, of course, all through history, there's been a huge body of spiritual technologies that have developed. Prayer, meditation, Qigong, and so many others. But mostly they've been done on an individual basis. And I think we need to rethink spiritual or technologies that leverage our universal sense of what do you want to call it, the common good, of our all being intricately interwoven in this, the warp and the woof of the world, to undertake what the poet Rilke called the great work of the world. That's not just an individual enterprise. We're really good at promoting ourselves. We're not so good at promoting the common good anymore. All the world's religious traditions, wisdom traditions, seem to rest on two pillars: the golden mean and the golden rule. Be at peace with yourself, and then in a composed frame of mind, be kind to others. We need to really do a better job of creating tools that help us to rediscover these two gold nuggets if we're going to survive in a silicon society. The two were mentioned in John's Gospel account of the Last Supper: peace be with you and love one another. That's what all those teachings came down to. After 30 months of preaching, it came down, those were the two takeaway points. And the Greeks at the same time recognized that they called it the golden mean and the golden rule. The golden mean is to live a life of moderation, which Icarus failed to do when his father told him to fly midway between the clouds and the sea, and to live a life of concern for others. We've kind of gotten away from that, and science and technology have done a lot to help motivate us away from that, and we need to reconnect them. But I was unconscious for 7 weeks 3 years ago. I had a surgery and then was in a coma for a month, and then in and out of consciousness for weeks after that. And I had a near-death experience. Maybe I had several, but I do not see the world at all. I mean, that just changed my whole way of seeing the world in ways that are a whole other subject. But coming out of that, I'm really keenly sensitive to, A, the benefits of technology. I understand I was hooked up to like 15 machines, and maybe 10 years ago they couldn't have pulled me back. On the other hand, when I see so much effort put into apps that are just incredible wastes of intellectual resources, when there are so many real problems to solve, it almost brings tears to your eyes. Well, we could go on and on about this. The thing is, I think we need bottom line, I think we need to reintroduce the two gold nuggets of ancient wisdom: moderation and compassion, composure and compassion, into the tools we make and use, why we make them, and give that kind of composed, compassionate thought to where we want to go with it. Because otherwise, we're like lemmings heading off, and the cliff's getting closer. Yeah, and just one. When I came to, I'd been inactive so long, all my limbs had atrophied. I was paralyzed. And one evening, an attendant picked me up and put me in a wheelchair and rolled me out into the garden at the hospital just to give me just to air me out, I think. And then he left me, and I panicked because there was nothing. There was no TV, PC, DVD, no magazine, no iPad or iPod or iClaudius. No, there was nothing to distract me. There was just a small field of grass and the breeze blowing through it. And I panicked. What am I going to do for 10 minutes? God, I mean, I think it was probably the first time since I was a child, 800 years ago, that I really had this sense of looking and seeing something so commonplace we don't even think about it. And I realized with a sort of a sudden flash that I might not have before that experience, I'm watching the Big Bang. It's still going on. The energy that was released all those eons ago is still here, moving this grass, which is cooled down energy. And it gets even more personal than that. As I exhale carbon dioxide, those grasses absorb it and release oxygen that keeps me going. And it's not just that I'm seeing the grass. The energy from that grass in the form of photons doesn't just impinge on my eyes, but on all my exposed skin. Just as my energy field is being absorbed by that grass. And once you start thinking down that line, it changes everything. I mean, you cannot go back to the old way of a divided universe. The interconnections, the classics had three virtues: beauty, truth, and goodness. The universe is beautiful, it's truthful, it never lies, and it's good. It's violent sometimes, but always the product of the violence is something new and more wonderful. Whether it's a new galaxy or a new mountain, the universe is beautiful, truthful, and good, and we should rediscover those virtues as we use the tools that are, in fact, the natural forces all around us, within us and without us. And that means, and that was probably the biggest thing I took out of my near-death experience, I had to face a judgment. And I thought, and the judge was me. It wasn't St. Peter or Jesus. I had to be my own judge. And I realized I got to cut myself some slack. You know, I can't be too severe on myself. And then I realized that means I have to cut some slack to my enemy. And a couple nights later, Dick Cheney was on TV. Dick Cheney used to make my hair catch fire, but just what he's done. And I thought, as a result of coming to, I just felt this flood of compassion going to Dick Cheney. The guy is rich and powerful, but his face is twisted into a perpetual scowl. He's had 6 or 8 heart attacks. And I just felt this warmth. Can I send you some energy to help you heal? Well, 2 weeks after the experience, it's gone away. But Dick Cheney is my litmus test. To see a picture of him, if I don't feel beatific towards him, I know the problem isn't his, it's mine. That's the most difficult thing of all. If we really do believe in a unified field, that means we have to encompass our enemy. And that is not frosting on the cake. That's the cake itself.